Grandma, Mom says we won't be here next week, Lily whispered through the phone at 2:13 in the morning, her small voice trembling so softly I almost thought I had imagined it. I sat upright in bed immediately, my heart pounding against my ribs as rain battered the windows of my house in northern Ohio. For a second, I couldn't speak. The digital clock beside my bed glowed red through the darkness while thunder rolled somewhere far across the hills. "Lily?" I said quietly. "Honey, what are you talking about?" I heard her breathing on the other end. Quick. Nervous. Like she was hiding somewhere. "Grandpa Gideon said the faithful families are leaving soon," she whispered. "Mom packed all my clothes tonight. Daddy keeps crying when he thinks nobody sees him." A cold feeling spread slowly through my chest. 8 months earlier, my son Michael would have laughed if someone called a preacher Grandpa. He used to mock television evangelists every Thanksgiving while carving the turkey in my kitchen. But now even his 11-year-old daughter sounded like a stranger. "Where's your father?" I asked. Before Lily could answer, I heard movement in the background. A door opening. Then footsteps. Her breathing suddenly sharpened. "I have to go," she whispered quickly. "Grandma. I don't want to drink the tea." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in silence while rain streaked across my bedroom windows. For several seconds I simply sat there in the dark, trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Children imagine strange things. Churches held retreats all the time. Maybe Rebecca had taken Lily to some late-night prayer gathering again. Maybe I was overreacting because grief had made me suspicious of everything since Harold died last winter. But deep down, beneath all the excuses I tried to build for myself, something felt terribly wrong. I threw off the blanket and walked downstairs barefoot, barely noticing how cold the hardwood floor felt beneath my feet. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the storm outside. Harold's coffee mug still sat on the shelf exactly where he had left it 9 months ago. Some mornings I still expected to hear him coughing in the garage while he searched for his fishing gear. Grief does strange things to a home. It turns ordinary silence into something alive. I grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter and looked at the family photo hanging near the doorway. Michael stood beside Rebecca with his arm around Lily during last year's 4th of July barbecue. They looked normal then. Happy. Sunburned. Lily had ketchup on her shirt because Harold dropped a hamburger while making her laugh. Nobody looking at that picture would have guessed our family was already beginning to disappear. The drive to Michael's house took almost 40 minutes through heavy rain. The roads were nearly empty except for a few truck headlights cutting through the darkness. I kept replaying Lily's final words in my mind. "I don't want to drink the tea." My fingers tightened around the steering wheel every time I thought about it. Michael lived in a quiet subdivision outside Millfield, the kind of neighborhood where every mailbox matched and people decorated for Christmas too early. But when I turned onto his street that night, the neighborhood looked wrong somehow. Too dark. Too still. His porch light was off. So were the lights inside the house. I parked at the curb and sat there for a moment watching rain slide across the windshield. Then I noticed the symbol painted beside the front door. A white circle with several lines crossing through it like broken branches. I had seen it once before on one of Rebecca's pamphlets from the church. The Sanctuary of Eternal Light. Pastor Gideon Vale's congregation. My stomach tightened immediately. I got out of the car and hurried toward the porch through the rain, my coat soaking through within seconds. "Michael!" I called, knocking hard against the door. "Rebecca?" No answer. The house remained silent. I tried the handle. Locked. Through the front window I could barely make out shapes inside the living room. Furniture covered in white sheets. Cardboard boxes stacked near the staircase. It looked less like a family home and more like a place already abandoned. Then I saw movement upstairs. A shadow crossing one of the bedroom windows. "Lily!" I shouted. The shadow stopped instantly. For one brief second, I thought someone was standing there watching me through the glass. Then the upstairs light switched off completely. I stood frozen in the rain, staring at the dark window while thunder shook the sky above the neighborhood. And for the first time since Harold's funeral, I felt something worse than grief. I felt fear. I stayed on Michael's porch for nearly 10 minutes that night, knocking until my knuckles hurt from the cold rain. Nobody answered. The upstairs window remained dark, but I could not shake the feeling that someone inside had been watching me. Eventually a porch light flicked on across the street, and an older man opened his front door halfway. "You looking for the Whitmores?" he called cautiously through the storm. I walked toward the curb, wrapping my coat tighter around myself. "I am Michael's mother," I said. "Do you know where they went?" The man hesitated before stepping onto his porch. "They left earlier tonight," he said. "A bunch of them did. Vans came around 9 o'clock. White vans with church decals on the side." My stomach tightened. "Did they say where they were going?" He shook his head slowly. "Just some retreat out near Blackwater County, I think. Those church people have been gathering there for months now." He lowered his voice slightly. "Folks around here have been getting nervous about them." Lightning flashed somewhere above the neighborhood, briefly illuminating the rows of wet houses and empty driveways. "Nervous how?" I asked. The man rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "They keep to themselves mostly. But families started disappearing from normal life after joining that church. Kids pulled out of school. Homes sold suddenly. People quitting jobs. My wife said your daughter-in-law used to wave every morning when she drove Lily to school. Then one day she just stopped." I looked back toward Michael's dark house. The rainwater dripping from the roof sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. "Thank you," I said quietly before returning to my car. I sat behind the wheel for several minutes without turning the engine on. The symbol beside the door kept replaying in my mind. I had first noticed it 6 months earlier on a brochure Rebecca left at my kitchen table after Easter dinner. At the time I thought it was simply another small-town church trying too hard to look modern and mysterious. Rebecca had smiled while explaining how Pastor Gideon helped people process grief and reconnect with faith. Michael barely spoke during that dinner. He mostly stared down at his plate while Lily pushed mashed potatoes around with her fork. Looking back now, I realized that was probably the beginning. The beginning of them slipping away from me one quiet inch at a time. By the time I drove home, it was nearly 4 in the morning. The storm had started to weaken, leaving behind a thick fog rolling across the empty roads. My headlights cut through it in pale streaks while exhaustion settled heavily into my chest. But I knew I was not going to sleep. The moment I walked inside my house, I went straight to the hallway closet and pulled down an old cardboard box filled with family photo albums. I carried them to the kitchen table and began flipping through years of birthdays, camping trips, and Christmas mornings. Michael at 12 years old holding his first baseball glove. Rebecca smiling beside him at their wedding in Vermont. Lily asleep on Harold's lap during a 4th of July fireworks show. Ordinary memories. Ordinary happiness. The kind people never imagine can disappear. Then I found a photograph from 8 months earlier, taken the week after Harold's funeral. Michael stood beside a tall silver-haired man wearing a charcoal grey suit and a small cross pin to his jacket. Pastor Gideon Vale. I remember that day suddenly with painful clarity. Gideon had shaken my hand gently after the service and told me grief was a doorway God sometimes uses to reshape families. At the time his voice sounded calm and comforting. Now the memory made my skin crawl. I stared at the photograph while dawn slowly brightened the kitchen windows. And somewhere deep inside me, a terrible realization finally began to form. Whatever was happening to my family had not started tonight. It had started the moment grief entered our home and someone else stepped inside with it. For the next 3 days, I barely left the house. I sat at my kitchen table with Harold's old spiral notebook open beside me, writing down every detail I could remember about Pastor Gideon Vale and the sanctuary of eternal light. The more I thought about it, the more clearly I saw how carefully he had entered Michael's life after the funeral. At first it seemed harmless. He sent flowers to the house every Sunday for a month after Harold died. Then he began inviting Michael and Rebecca to private grief counseling sessions at the church outside Blackwater County. Michael said Gideon understood loss in a way ordinary pastors did not. I remember Rebecca calling him a blessing during one family dinner. At the time I was too exhausted by my own grief to pay attention. I should have paid attention. By Thursday morning I finally decided to drive to the church myself. Blackwater County sat about 70 miles east of Millfield, mostly farmland and wooded hills with long stretches of empty road between gas stations. The sanctuary of eternal light was hidden at the end of a gravel road surrounded by pine trees so tall they blocked most of the sunlight. The church itself did not look like a church at all. It looked more like a luxury retreat center. Large white buildings. Clean windows. Perfectly trimmed grass. Everything unnaturally quiet. I parked beside several white vans marked with the same symbol I had seen on Michael's front door. A woman in a pale cream dress stepped outside almost immediately as if she had been waiting for me. She smiled, but the smile never fully reached her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked softly. "I am looking for my son," I said. "Michael Whitmore. My granddaughter Lily called me earlier this week and sounded frightened." The woman's expression did not change. "Families here are reconnecting with God away from outside distractions," she replied calmly. "Pastor Gideon believes healing requires separation from fear." "A child should not sound afraid while healing," I said. For a brief second, something cold flickered across her face before the smile returned. "Fear is part of transformation." I looked past her toward the largest building. Near the trees, several people dressed in pale clothing moved quietly between the structures carrying boxes and folded blankets. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Even from the parking lot the entire place felt wrong to me. Like a hospital pretending to be a church. "I would like to see my family," I said firmly. The woman folded her hands politely in front of her. "Pastor Gideon is conducting preparation services today. Members are not accepting outside visitors." "Preparation for what?" I asked. Before she answered, the front doors of the main building opened slowly. Pastor Gideon Vale stepped outside with two men walking behind him. He looked exactly as I remembered. Silver hair carefully combed back. Calm eyes. Expensive charcoal coat despite the muddy gravel roads. He walked toward me with the same gentle smile he wore at Harold's funeral. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said warmly. "I was hoping we would speak soon." His voice was smooth enough to make ordinary words sound comforting. That was what frightened me most. "Where is my son?" I asked immediately. "Michael is finding peace," Gideon replied. "Your family has carried deep grief for too long." "My granddaughter sounded terrified on the phone," I said. Gideon lowered his head slightly, almost sympathetically. Children sometimes fear change before they understand salvation. The word salvation lingered heavily between us. I stared at him while cold wind moved through the pine trees behind the buildings. Then I noticed something strange near the entrance doors. A large wooden board covered with handwritten names. Entire families listed together beneath dates. Some names had small white marks beside them. "What is that?" I asked quietly. Gideon glanced toward the board without concern. "Those are the faithful preparing for Ascension." I felt my stomach tighten again. "And what exactly is Ascension?" For the first time since I arrived, Gideon's smile faded slightly. "The end of fear," he said softly. "The beginning of eternity." Then he looked directly into my eyes and added something I still hear in my nightmares sometimes. "Your son believes his family is finally ready." I drove home from Blackwater County with my hand shaking so badly I had to pull over twice along the highway. Gideon's words kept replaying in my head like a song I could not turn off. "Your son believes his family is finally ready." By the time I reached Millfield, the sun was already setting behind the old grain silos west of town, staining the sky a dull orange that made everything feel strangely unreal. I remember sitting in my driveway for nearly 15 minutes staring at my porch light while the engine ticked softly in the cooling evening air. Part of me still wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. Michael was not weak-minded. He was a financial analyst who used spreadsheets for everything from grocery budgets to vacation planning. Rebecca used to joke that he researched coffee makers like they were government conspiracies. People like my son were not supposed to disappear into cults. But grief changes people slowly. Quietly. Like water wearing down stone. Harold's death had hollowed something out inside Michael that I did not fully understand until it was too late. The next morning I drove to Lily's middle school hoping someone there might know more. The front office secretary recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said kindly, "we have not seen Lily in over 3 months." My chest tightened. 3 months. She nodded while pulling up records on her computer. Her parents submitted withdrawal paperwork. They stated she would continue education through a faith-based homeschool program. I stared at the family photos taped beside the secretary's desk. School plays. Science fairs. Soccer teams. Ordinary childhood moments Lily was no longer part of. Did Lily seem all right before she left? I asked quietly. The secretary hesitated before answering. She became very withdrawn near the end. One teacher mentioned Lily seemed exhausted all the time. She stopped talking to friends during lunch. I thanked her and walked slowly back through the parking lot. Nearby, children were climbing onto yellow school buses while parents waited in pickup lines. The sounds felt distant somehow. Normal life continuing while my own family drifted farther away from it every day. That afternoon I called Michael's cell phone 11 times. Every call went directly to voicemail. Rebecca's phone had already been disconnected. Finally, just after 7 o'clock, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was from Michael. "Please stop interfering. We are safe. Lily is safe. Pastor Gideon is helping us prepare for what is coming." I read the message 3 times before replying. "Your daughter called me crying at 2 in the morning." Several minutes passed before another message appeared. "Fear is part of cleansing. You would understand if you trusted God." I stared at those words in disbelief. Michael had never spoken like that before. Not once in 42 years of life. I typed back immediately. "Come home. We can talk about whatever is happening. Lily belongs in school. She belongs with family." This time the response came almost instantly. "The church is our family now." I felt something inside me go cold when I read that sentence. Not anger. Not panic. Something worse. Recognition. I finally understood that Gideon had not simply manipulated my son. He had replaced everything around him piece by piece until the church became more real to Michael than his own life. His own mother. His own child. That night I could not sleep again. Around midnight I walked into Harold's old workshop behind the house and sat alone beside his fishing gear and rusted tool cabinet. The room still smelled faintly of cedar wood and motor oil. Harold used to say people needed community because loneliness made them vulnerable to dangerous things. Back then he was talking about gambling and alcohol after his brother lost everything in the 1980s. But sitting there in the dim workshop light, I realized loneliness could make people vulnerable to almost anything if someone promised them certainty in return. Then my phone vibrated again beside me on the workbench. Another message from Michael. Only 4 words this time. Ascension begins on Sunday. Sunday was 4 days away. For days until whatever Gideon called Ascension. I spent the next morning driving across Millfield searching for anyone who understood what the sanctuary of eternal light really was. Most people avoided talking about it directly. At a diner near Route 16, a waitress in her 60s lowered her voice when I mentioned Gideon's name. That church buys up land quietly through shell companies, she told me while refilling my coffee. People around here say families who join stop talking to outsiders after a few months. I stirred cream into the coffee slowly. Has anyone reported them? The waitress gave a tired shrug. Nothing illegal ever sticks. The members always say they are there voluntarily. Voluntarily. That word haunted me the entire drive home. Michael was 39 years old. Rebecca was an adult. Nobody could force them to leave if they insisted they wanted to stay. But Lily was 11. She still slept with a stuffed rabbit during thunderstorms. She still called me crying in the middle of the night. That was not voluntary. By early afternoon I found myself parked outside the county sheriff's office in Blackwater. The building smelled faintly of old paper and floor cleaner. Deputy Samuel Reeves listened patiently while I explained everything from Lily's phone call to Gideon's strange comments about Ascension. He was a tall man somewhere in his late 40s with tired eyes and silver beginning to spread through his beard. When I finished speaking, he leaned back quietly in his chair. Mrs. Whitmore, he said carefully, we have received complaints about the sanctuary before. Mostly concerns about isolation and financial manipulation. But legally, religious groups have broad protections unless we see evidence of immediate danger. My granddaughter said she was afraid, I replied. Reeves folded his hands together. Fear alone is difficult to act on. Teenagers say strange things all the time during family conflicts. Lily is not a teenager, I said sharply. She is a child. The deputy nodded slowly. I understand. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he opened a file cabinet beside his desk and removed a thin folder. Off the record, he said quietly, you are not the first grandmother to sit in this office worried about that church. My chest tightened immediately. Reeves opened the folder and slid several photocopied documents across the desk. Property transfers. Donation records. Handwritten letters from former members. One sentence near the bottom of a witness statement caught my attention immediately. Pastor Gideon teaches that faithful families must separate completely from corrupt society before Ascension begins. I looked up slowly. What exactly does he tell them Ascension is? Reeves hesitated before answering. Depends on who you ask. Some former members describe it as a spiritual transformation. Others claim Gideon teaches the world is approaching collapse and only selected believers will survive. And Michael believes this. I whispered. Reeves did not answer directly. Instead he pointed toward one of the donation records. My son's name was listed there beside an amount that made my stomach drop nearly instantly. $380,000. Nearly all of Michael's retirement savings. I stared at the number in disbelief. That is impossible, I murmured. Michael planned everything financially. He would never, my voice faded. Reeves watched me quietly. Cults rarely recruit foolish people, he said softly. They recruit grieving people. Outside the office window, rain clouds were beginning to gather again over the hills. I suddenly remembered the exhausted look on Michael's face during Harold's funeral reception. The way Gideon kept a hand gently on his shoulder while speaking to him in low, calm tones. Back then I thought he was comforting my son. Now I realized he had been studying him. Learning exactly where the grief was deepest. Before I left, Reeves handed me a business card with his personal number written on the back. If your granddaughter contacts you again, he said, call me immediately. I slipped the card into my purse and walked slowly toward the parking lot. The sky above Blackwater County had turned the dull gray color that always comes before a storm. And somewhere beyond those pine-covered hills, my family was preparing for something I still did not fully understand. Friday evening arrived with thick fog spreading across Millfield so heavily that even the streetlights outside my house looked blurred and distant. I spent most of the afternoon sitting beside the kitchen window with Deputy Reeves's card beside my coffee cup, waiting for my phone to ring. Every sound made me jump. Every pair of headlights passing the house made my heart race for a second before fading again into the fog. Around 6:30, the phone finally vibrated against the table. Unknown number. I answered so quickly I nearly dropped it. Lily? Silence filled the line at first. Then I heard shallow breathing. Grandma, she whispered. Her voice sounded weaker than before, exhausted somehow. They took away everybody's phones. I found this one in a drawer. I closed my eyes for a second just hearing her voice. Honey, listen to me carefully, I said softly. Are you safe? Another silence. Then very quietly, I do not think so. My chest tightened immediately. Where is your father? In the prayer hall, she whispered. Everybody is getting ready for Sunday. In the background I could hear faint singing. Slow. Repetitive. Like a hymn being whispered by dozens of people at once. Lily, I said carefully, what is happening there? I heard her sniffle softly before answering. Pastor Gideon says families have to let go of fear together. Tomorrow we all wear white for cleansing. Her words came out in frightened little bursts. Mom keeps saying we are chosen. Daddy keeps crying at night when he thinks I am asleep. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table so hard my knuckles turned white. Listen to me, I whispered urgently. I need you to stay close to your father, all right? And if you get a chance, tell him Grandma loves him. Tell him he can still come home. Lily did not answer immediately. Then she asked something that nearly broke me. Grandma, if people love God enough, do they stop being scared to die? I felt tears sting my eyes for the first time since Harold's funeral. But I forced my voice to stay calm. No church should ever make a child ask that question, I said softly. You hear me? None. I suddenly heard footsteps somewhere near her. Lily gasped quietly. I have to go. Wait, I whispered quickly. Where exactly are you? But the line went dead again. I stared at my phone for one frozen second before grabbing Reeves's card from the table. He answered on the second ring. 20 minutes later I was driving through fog toward Blackwater County while Reeves followed behind me in an unmarked sheriff's vehicle. The farther east we drove, the emptier the roads became. By the time we reached the gravel entrance to the sanctuary, night had completely settled over the hills. Lights glowed softly through the trees ahead. Dozens of candles flickering behind windows. Hymns drifting faintly through the fog. Reeves parked beside me and stepped out slowly, his flashlight hanging unused at his side. Something feels wrong, he muttered quietly. I nodded without speaking. We walked toward the main building together. The compound looked almost peaceful from a distance. White-robed figures moved silently between the buildings carrying lanterns and trays covered with cloth. Nobody acknowledged us. Nobody even seemed surprised we were there. Near the entrance hall stood the large wooden board I had seen earlier in the week. More names had been added now. Entire families listed beneath tomorrow's date. Small white marks beside nearly every name. Whitmore. Michael. Rebecca. Lily. I stared at those names while cold wind moved through the pine trees overhead. Then I noticed something else beneath the list written carefully in dark ink. Fear must be surrendered before Ascension. Reeves read the words beside me in silence. Then somewhere deep inside the compound, all the singing suddenly stopped at once. The silence that followed felt worse than the singing. 1 second the hymns drifted softly through the fog, and the next there was nothing at all. No voices. No footsteps. Just the wind moving through the pine trees above us. Deputy Reeves exchanged a quick glance with me before reaching for his radio. Dispatch, this is Reeves, he said quietly. Requesting immediate backup at the sanctuary compound. Static crackled briefly through the speaker before dispatch confirmed units were on the way. Reeves clipped the radio back onto his belt and looked toward the main building. Stay close to me, he said. We moved carefully through the compound courtyard while lanterns flickered along. The pathways between buildings. Several cups still sat on wooden benches beside half-finished meals. Steam rose faintly from a large metal pot outside the dining hall. Whatever gathering had been happening here seemed to have stopped suddenly. But there were no signs of panic. No overturned furniture. No sounds of people rushing away. It was as if the entire compound had simply gone still all at once. Reeves tried the front doors of the prayer hall. Locked. He knocked loudly. "Sheriff's Department," he called. "Open the door." No answer came. I stepped closer to one of the tall windows beside the entrance and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Candles burned inside the hall, casting long shadows across rows of white chairs. At first I thought the room was empty. Then I noticed movement near the far wall. Someone sitting motionless beside the altar. "Michael," I whispered. Reeves immediately moved beside me with his flashlight raised. Through the dim candlelight I could finally see my son clearly. He sat alone in the front row wearing white clothes, his head lowered slightly as if deep in prayer. "Michael!" I shouted, pounding against the glass. He looked up slowly. Even through the window I could see how pale and exhausted he looked. His eyes seemed hollow somehow, like he had not slept in weeks. Reeves shouted again for him to open the door. Michael stood unsteadily and walked toward us. For one brief second relief flooded through me. He was alive. He was standing right there. But when he reached the doors, he stopped. He did not unlock them. Instead he simply stared at me through the narrow glass panel. "Mom," he said softly through the door. His voice sounded distant. "Weak. You should not be here." "Where is Lily?" I asked immediately. His face tightened at her name. "She is resting." "Open this door," Reeves ordered firmly. Michael shook his head slowly. "It is too late now." Fear surged through my chest so suddenly it made me dizzy. "Michael, listen to me," I said, pressing both hands against the glass. "Whatever Gideon told you is a lie. You can still leave with us. Lily can still come home." For a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Confusion maybe. Or guilt. Then tears slowly filled his eyes. "You do not understand," he whispered. "Dad was right. The world is empty. Everybody lies. Everybody leaves eventually." His voice cracked slightly. "Pastor Gideon promised we would never be afraid again." I felt my throat tighten painfully hearing my son sound so broken. "Michael," I whispered, "your father would never want this." He closed his eyes briefly. And when he opened them again, the softness was gone. "Ascension starts tonight," he said quietly. Then he stepped backward away from the door. "Wait!" I shouted. Reeves slammed his fist against the glass. "Michael!" But my son kept walking slowly toward the altar at the far end of the hall. Candlelight flickered across the walls behind him while fog pressed heavily against the windows outside. Then another figure appeared from the shadows near the stage. Pastor Gideon Vale. Calm. Perfectly composed. He rested one hand gently on Michael's shoulder and looked directly at me through the glass. And then he smiled. The next few minutes blurred together in my memory like a nightmare half hidden behind fog. Deputy Reeves called for backup again while pounding against the locked doors hard enough to rattle the glass. Inside the prayer hall, candlelight flickered across the walls while Gideon guided Michael calmly back toward the altar. Neither of them looked frightened. That was what terrified me most. Whatever was happening inside the building, they believed in it completely. Reeves stepped back from the entrance and spoke urgently into his radio. More patrol units were already on the way from Blackwater. I kept staring through the narrow window searching desperately for Lily. "I cannot see her," I whispered. "Oh God, where is she?" Then suddenly every candle inside the hall went out at once. Darkness swallowed the room completely. I heard several muffled voices inside. Then silence again. Reeves swore under his breath and grabbed my arm gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, step back." Another deputy vehicle finally turned into the compound driveway behind us, headlights cutting through the fog between the pine trees. 2 more officers hurried toward the entrance, carrying flashlights and bolt cutters. Everything after that happened quickly. Metal snapped. Chains fell loose. The heavy doors finally opened inward with a long groan. Cold air drifted out from the dark prayer hall carrying the faint smell of candles and herbal tea. Reeves entered first while the other deputies swept flashlights across the room. I followed before anyone could stop me. The hall looked strangely peaceful inside. Rows of white chairs. Open Bibles resting neatly beneath soft candle smoke. White flowers arranged along the altar. It almost looked prepared for a wedding instead of whatever this place had become. Then I saw them. Families lying quietly together across the front rows wrapped in white blankets. Some appeared asleep. Others held hands. Children rested beside parents beneath flickering emergency lights from the deputies' flashlights. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. "Michael!" I screamed, stumbling forward between the chairs. I found him near the altar with Rebecca leaning against his shoulder. Lily lay curled beside them holding her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. My son's face looked calm in a way I had not seen for months. Peaceful. Empty. I dropped beside them shaking so badly I could barely breathe. "Michael," I whispered, touching his cold hand. "Michael, wake up." But nothing changed. Around me the deputies moved carefully through the hall checking for survivors while radios crackled urgently in the background. Somebody called for ambulances even though I think everyone already understood the truth. Then Reeves approached slowly carrying a folded piece of paper he had found near Michael's chair. He handed it to me without speaking. My hands trembled violently as I unfolded it. The handwriting was Michael's. "Mom, I am sorry. I truly believed I was protecting my family from fear. Pastor Gideon promised us peace beyond this broken world. If you are reading this, then I was wrong. Please remember Lily laughing on the 4th of July, not this place." I stared at those words until the letters blurred through my tears. Somewhere behind me one of the deputies suddenly shouted, "The pastor is gone." Reeves turned sharply. Officers searched the rear offices and private rooms behind the altar, but Gideon Vale had disappeared. His office stood nearly empty except for missing financial records and several unlocked filing cabinets. One back door near the woods hung slightly open, swaying gently in the cold night wind. I looked around the silent prayer hall one last time. White blankets. Candles still smoking softly. Families who had followed one man so far into grief and fear that they never found their way back out again. Then my eyes fell on Lily's stuffed rabbit beside her hand. Rainwater from my coat dripped quietly onto the wooden floor while I realized something that still haunts me every morning when I wake up. My family had not vanished in a single night. They had disappeared piece by piece long before anyone understood they needed saving. 6 months passed before I could sleep through an entire night again. Even now, some mornings I still wake up expecting to hear Lily laughing somewhere down the hallway or Michael calling to ask if I remembered Harold's chili recipe for football season. Grief does not leave all at once. It settles into a house quietly and learns how to live beside you. The sanctuary compound was demolished by the county 3 months after the investigation ended. News vans crowded Blackwater County for weeks afterward. Reporters stood outside my home asking questions about Pastor Gideon Vale and the families who followed him. True crime podcasts called it one of the most disturbing religious tragedies in Ohio history. Experts debated cult psychology on television while old photographs of Michael and Rebecca flashed across computer screens beside headlines about manipulation and mass delusion. But none of those people understood who my family really was before all of this. They saw victims. They saw headlines. I still saw Michael teaching Lily how to ride a bicycle in my driveway when she was 6 years old. I still saw Rebecca crying with happiness during her wedding dance. That was the cruelest part. Evil rarely enters people's lives looking frightening at first. Sometimes it arrives wearing kindness and scripture and promises. About healing broken hearts. Pastor Gideon Vale was never found. Authorities tracked financial transfers through several states, but by the time investigators understood how much money had disappeared from the sanctuary accounts, he was already gone. Some people believed he escaped to Canada. Others claimed he had followers in Arizona or Montana helping him hide. Every few weeks another rumor surfaced online. A blurry photograph. A church gathering somewhere in the Midwest. A man preaching about purification and fear. None of it was ever confirmed. Deputy Reeves still calls occasionally to check on me. Last month he told me federal investigators believe smaller groups connected to Gideon may still exist online. Private forums. Invitation-only prayer meetings. Families searching for meaning after loss. The cycle continuing somewhere else beneath different names. After we hung up, I sat alone in Harold's workshop for nearly an hour staring at Lily's stuffed rabbit resting on the shelf beside his old fishing tackle box. It was the only thing I brought home from the sanctuary that night. Sometimes I catch myself wondering whether I should have recognized the signs earlier. Maybe if I had pushed harder after Harold's funeral. Maybe if I had not ignored the strange things Rebecca started saying. Maybe if I had driven to Blackwater sooner. Guilt is like that. It rewrites the past endlessly trying to invent different endings. Last week, for the first time in months, snow finally covered Millfield. I stood at the kitchen window before sunrise watching white flakes drift quietly across the empty street outside my house. Everything looked peaceful again. Ordinary. Then I noticed something near the front porch. A small padded envelope sitting beside the welcome mat. No return address. My stomach tightened instantly. I opened the front door slowly and picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph. Pastor Gideon standing beside several unfamiliar people somewhere near a wooded lake. Everyone wore white. On the back, written carefully in dark ink, was one sentence. The faithful are never truly gone. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time staring at those words while snow continued falling outside the windows. Then I looked toward the family photo hanging near the hallway. Harold smiling beside Michael. Rebecca holding Lily in her lap during one of our old Christmas mornings before grief entered our lives and hollowed everything out from the inside. And in that moment I finally understood something I wish more people knew before it is too late. Dangerous people do not destroy families all at once. They do it slowly. Quietly. One wounded heart at a time.